Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is Amanda Wilkie. Amanda, thank you for being on this episode of the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jon.
Absolutely. Amanda is one of our process and technology consultants. And Amanda, you live and breathe process improvement within firms. You've seen the starts, you've seen the ends, you've seen the ups and downs throughout the entire process. And I was telling you right before we clicked record on this episode that I love the title of this episode, and it's how to ensure your process changes survive tax season. Now, the reason I laughed at that is because a lot of process changes are meant to actually improve the experience for everyone as it relates to tax season, but it's also saying, or it's also worth acknowledging that sometimes process changes actually don't survive tax season for various reasons. And so let's unpack that a little bit. So,
well, Jon, let's face it. Change is hard. Change is really hard. And in tax season, when things start to get really busy, it's very easy to revert back to the old processes. So that's why sometimes it's hard to make those changes stick. But also, when you get busy, when you're in the thick of it in tax season, you're actually stress testing some of the changes to the process as well. And some of the things that you thought were going to work, they might not work exactly the way that you think they are, or you expect them to really work. So there's a fine line or a balance between, kind of sticking it out and taking that feedback and making some changes along the way. But that's all part of continuous improvement.
Yes, that's really good, Amanda. I think to you and I, and to the firms that you've really helped transform through working with them on process improvement initiatives, we all get the why behind this. Okay. But for our listeners out there who maybe have resigned a little bit to the idea that it's really hard to get standardized processes in our firm because of fill in the blank. And you've heard it all. There's nothing I can say that you haven't heard for that. Let's talk to those listeners real quick in the sense of why is it so important for firms to actually establish some processes, even if they might end up changing or evolving, as you just highlighted during tax season? Why is it so important they go in on the front end with clearly defined processes?
Yeah. Well, Jon, you used a bad word in process improvement, so you can put $1 in the swear jar for us later. But you used the word standardized process. And I think that is exactly what holds some firms back, is they're looking for a standard process. And when you say standard, standard means that it's going to be done the same way every time. Now, we all know that there are exceptions to the rule. So the word that we like to use is consistent. We want a consistent process because we want to build a process that is going to work for 80% of the time. So 80% of the clients, 80% of the audits, 80% of the tax returns, knowing that there's going to be exceptions. But if you build a process that is consistent for the majority of your clients, and understand that there are exceptions, then you can manage the exceptions and not manage to the exceptions. And that's one of the things that really holds firms back, is that they want a process that's going to work for every single client, every single time. And then they get into tax season and they're like, oh, well, this change didn't work. This new process that the team came up with, it doesn't work for my clients, so it's not going to work for at all. So I'm going back to the old way that I did it for all of my clients, because that way worked every single time. So I think that's one of the challenges that firms really have when it comes to process improvement. But to answer your question, it is important to go into busy season with consistent processes so that you can create that capacity and that clarity for your not only your staff but also for your clients around expectations, when to expect things, who's doing things, how you're going to keep that work moving forward as fast as possible while building quality in from the very beginning. So that is the goal of process improvement. But a lot of firms really struggle with it because they do feel like they have to build a process that's going to work for every single case every single time.
I love the idea, Amanda, of you facilitating a firm through a process engagement and there being a swear jar in the middle of the room that says standardize on it. And anytime someone says that S word, they have to put in a quarter or a dollar in it. But you also highlighted something too, because I spend a lot of my time when I work with firms in the area of growth or leadership. And one phrase I always try and cut out from firms, and I call it a swear word with them as well, is my client. And you use that language with what firms say to you. Well, with my client, it won't work, or things of that sort. And I think one thing you help shape in process improvement engagements is that more of a firm approach, right, to kind of to all the points you made versus taking each individual person and looking at through the lens of what they would consider to be just only their client, when in reality they have a whole team of people working on that client as well. And so I think that's really great advice. In terms of strategies or solutions, this is a great time for firms to be thinking about process improvement. What's your advice in terms of some potential strategies they can begin implementing to start to ensure their processes don't, um, you know, go away during tax season?
Yeah. Well, John, anytime we do a process improvement project with a firm, we take a small cross-functional team that's been empowered to make these changes. And that's who we really facilitate through the process improvement framework. At the end of that project, well, we call it the end, we call it the project completion. We always ask them, when is this project done? Are we done? Have we met the objectives? And it's always a bit of a trick question. The answer is that process improvement is never really done. What we're doing is we move into the continuous improvement phase. So that continuous improvement phase starts as soon as we are done with the project team days, if you will, because that's really only phase one. So we actually stay involved and we talk to our firms that we've worked with multiple times through busy season to help make sure that they stay on track. And one of the first things we do is we tell them that as they're rolling out the new process to the firm, stress continuous improvement. Understand that no process is perfect, and this process is not going to be perfect. So we want to make sure that we are collecting feedback and we're making adjustments, and that we understand that things are going to change. Now, with that being said, there are really, I would say, 4 steps to kind of getting your process back on track if you see those things kind of going off the rails. First is really verifying acceptance. So acceptance in the new process. And part of that is understanding why. If someone comes and says, hey, I have an exception, if they use that phrase, John, that, hey, this isn't working for my client, after they put a dollar in the swear jar, then you want to find out why this is not working for your client. Because it may be true. There may be something specific about that client. You may have uncovered an exception that the project team wasn't able to identify during the project, but you want to find out why. And then you want to help find a solution. And we always ask two why questions, or we say that you should be able to proactively answer two why questions. And one is, why do we need to change? And why will this be better? So if someone comes and they says, this won't work for my client, then you need to find out why it won't work for their client. And you need to be able to answer, why do we need to change? Why did we change this part of the process? What was the pain point that this is fixing? So why we need to change and why this will be better. Is it going to be a better client experience? Is it going to build quality in from the beginning? Is it going to ensure that we can move work forward and continue to keep it moving forward faster? But again, understanding and verifying that people accept the change is very important. A lot of times, John, and we know 100% buy-in is a complete myth. So a lot of times you have people sitting in the rollout of a process, a new process, and they're shaking their heads. And in their mind, they're thinking, this is never going to work for my clients. So you have to verify that they're on board with the changes, that they accept the changes in the process. And if not, if they uncover something that doesn't work for one of the firm's clients, then you need to understand the why behind that. So that's step one, John, is verifying that acceptance, but also make sure that the process is visible so that outliers stand out. And you can do this a lot of times by using your workflow solution, looking at how things are moving, how fast they're moving. You can help identify some of those outliers. And I'll give you an example, John. In many firms that we work with, I won't say in many, in every firm that we work with on a 1040 process, or actually entity tax process, we encourage them to use preparation pools. So you put everything into a pool, all of the returns into a pool, and people are responsible. Your preparers are responsible for going into that pool and pulling out FIFO. So by FIFO, pulling out a return and working on it. So if you notice, or if you're using the pools and you're looking at how long things are sitting in that step, in that assigned to that pool, you're going to be able to identify some of those outliers. So make sure that you're using your technology to create visibility into the process so that you can identify those outliers. So that would be step two for how to really keep your process on track during a very busy time. So during tax season. The third step is really providing that timely feedback and requesting timely feedback. So creating an environment where that person can come to you and say, hey, this isn't working for my client. And then you, in a timely manner, provide feedback of how we can make it work for a firm client. So that's number three. So we've got verify the acceptance of the process, make the process visible, accept and provide timely feedback. And then the last one, John, the fourth step, is really keeping score of the process. So look at how well the process is improving. And so some of those things look like, are we actually doing more? Have we gotten more returns out the door this tax season? Even some of it can be subjective. How is the staff feeling? John, we had a firm that we worked with last year. And when it came to last tax season, we were talking to them on one of our check-in calls, and they shared a story that, was, I think it's a typical story, but I think it really highlights how process improvement can work and the importance of keeping score. And what they told us was that their staff was actually stressed out. Their staff was stressed out because they hadn't been as stressed out as prior tax seasons. So they felt like as they got closer to the deadline, all this work was going to come in and they were just going to be completely crushed. And when they looked at the numbers, they had actually done more work. They had gotten more returns out the door by that point in tax season than in prior years. So they were pre-stressing because they didn't realize how well the process was working. So being able to have that visibility and create that transparency and then celebrate these successes, that helped keep the process on track, because they could have very easily said, oh no, this isn't going to work as we get closer to tax season. And just that, that stress that was creating could have gotten them to kind of fall off the tracks. So again, verify the acceptance, make the process visible, accept and provide timely feedback, and then keep score of the process and celebrate those successes as well.
That's so interesting, that story you just shared, where that firm was so conditioned to be stressed at that time of the year that they
Yeah.
were already, like, their bodies were already committing to that stress before they even realized they shouldn't be. And
Yeah. They felt like they should be working harder because they had worked harder in the past. And so they couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that tax season was actually smoother and lower stress for them.
it's it's so interesting. I was just talking with a firm on that, working harder comment. And I was just chatting with them and I said, as you look to grow, you need to make sure, your processes, your technology, some growth strategies are allowing you to grow smarter, not harder. And they said, you mean work smarter, not work harder? And I said, no, I mean grow smarter, so you don't have so you can work smarter. And they're like, oh, that's a interesting play on words. And they're so used to just hearing work harder, work harder, work harder, that this idea of even being able to make some real strategic changes like this so they can get more work done with less effort
Yeah.
is mind-blowing.
Yeah. Yeah. Grow smarter so you don't have to work harder.
Yes, exactly. And it's really, yeah, that's a great way to summarize it. So yeah, that's awesome. So we already started to get into some of the benefits there, but you've seen firms do this well, you've seen firms not do this well. In addition to firms just being able to not have to stress as much and work as hard because they're not competing against or swimming upstream against poor processes, what are some other benefits you've seen firms have?
Yeah. Definitely creating more capacity for their staff. That is number one. We're hearing that a lot. Also, create with that capacity, you can have your staff actually work on higher value work with the client, build relationships with the client. But also, when you take a step back and you have that capacity, you can actually start your staff can start to look at leveraging their technology better. And this is something, John, you've heard me talk about it time and time again. Your staff, young people today, did not go to college. They're not, killing themselves studying for the CPA exam to do data entry. They really want to be working on exciting projects. They want to be working with cool technology, building automation and things like that. So your younger staff, you want to give them those types of opportunities. But if they are just so busy doing the mundane, they're not going to have the capacity, they're not going to have the creativity to really work on those things. So Now, it's kind of a long-winded way to say, one of the benefits is that you're going to have more creative, more engaged staff as well, and they are going to be able to pivot more quickly. So they're going to be able to take process changes, and they're going to be able to look at it and say, this is how we can improve it even more. That goes back to kind of that timely feedback, and knowing that you're in a continuous improvement phase, that the process isn't perfect. Now, I will say to that when that happens, John, in the middle of busy season, you have to be very careful. Like if there are some small tweaks to the process, great, make those small tweaks, but keep in mind that you need to let the process actually work. So in some of that feedback that you get, I would encourage you to accept that feedback, be thankful for that feedback, but it may be some feedback that you want to consider for after busy season, after you've seen what the process looks like, and you can reevaluate that process. So got a little off of some of those benefits, but to recap the benefits, John, it helps build, processes will help build capacity, and it will help, that capacity will help create better relationships with your clients and more creativity from your staff as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we don't talk enough about creativity in this profession, but you put it in a great context there. That's where people want to be spending their time, talents, and energy. And so excellent advice. All right, as we kind of round out our conversation here, Amanda, for this episode, if you had to give one piece of advice, maybe it's a next step, as soon as they stop listening to this podcast, if there's one thing they could do to get moving in the right direction to really best prepare for tax season, what would be your advice?
Um, Oof, I only get to pick one,
You can
John.
pick, you're the expert here, so you can
Yeah.
give multiple.
No, I would say the number one thing is to accept that feedback as a gift. It's not always something that you have to, act on immediately. Remember that you're in a continuous improvement phase. You want to let the process work, but keep in mind that no process is 100% perfect. That's why continuous improvement is an ongoing initiative, and just keep that front of mind. You're never going to be done with process improvement.
That's great. Excellent advice. And I think I saw the other day you wearing a t-shirt that says continuous improvement. So you're always promoting that mantra, even with your wardrobe, which is great.
I do have the t-shirt, John. I do.
Yeah, that's
Been
awesome.
there, done that, have the t-shirt.
That's great. Well, Amanda, as always, it's a pleasure speaking with you. For those listeners out there, if you enjoyed Amanda and I's conversation, we release new episodes every Tuesday morning. We like to rotate the topics and rotate the themes, but the common theme among all those topics is that we believe they are critical to your firm's growth and success. So please go ahead and subscribe, and thanks for listening. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, John.